Okay, let's move to the topic that I know something about, which is food. So feeding the world is a very, very complex problem. And not only complex now, it's going to be more complex in the next 35 years because we go to 10 billion people, and those 10 billion people have increasingly sophisticated requirements for high-quality proteins, or what we call high-quality proteins. And these are really, really expensive parts of our diet. So can we actually apply exponential thinking to food? Food is very material. You cannot kind of digitize it. You cannot dematerialize it. You can maybe not even demonetize it. But if you think about digitization of food, I think about just chemistry, right? We are made out of sugars, fatty acids, and proteins. That's pretty much it. And a couple of minerals, I guess. That's it. And if we have in our food, and some of these, I guess you have been exposed to, we had kind of a hype in trying to minimize our carbohydrates, trying to minimize our fatty acids. There's not a hype yet in trying to minimize our proteins. May happen at some point, probably not. At the moment, we are still in kind of the cycle where we herald proteins as the best part of our diet. But in essence, our food is just a bunch of chemicals that you can make in very, very different ways. And I will come back to that bit. Deception, I think the deception would be that agriculture is low-tech. There's nothing low-tech about agriculture nowadays. I will show an example of that. Disruption, there is potential for disruption quite a bit, and probably the need for disruption, as we've seen in the nitrous debate here in the Netherlands. Demonetization, of course, you can think of a sharing economy where you just share food and not really pay for it. And dematerialize, I cannot think of a way how to dematerialize food. There is, however you think about it, even if you start producing things in a very different way, there's always a kind of material component about this. All right, so 13,000 years ago in the Arabic Crescent, that was what already was developed in biology. The photosynthesis using plants to grow food was perfected in such a way that we could actually grow more food than we needed, build societies, and the argument has been made by Jared Diamond that basically was the source of our current societies. We no longer had to be nomads. We could grow in one place enough food for a whole bunch of people, and you could grow communities from them. It's basically this chemical reaction that started 2.5 billion years ago in plants, where or actually it started in bacteria, where CO2 from the air, water from the environment was made under sunlight into sugar and oxygen, right? That was the start of our atmosphere. That was the start of also producing sugars as the basic building block of life. And of course, sugar is also a building block for amino acids and fatty acids, and for DNA, you need some nitrogen and phosphorus to add to it, but that's basically the chemistry required to make all life. Very, very simple, very, very efficient. Very efficient in making energetic components for living organisms and getting CO2 out of the air, right? And producing oxygen. So how did that come about? That came about by these little green guys. These little green guys are chloroplasts, and they invaded plants about 2.5 billion years ago as an invasive species originally. They were not originally in plants, but they invaded them as an invasive species. And that allowed us to build the entire society. Now, that is the basis. Currently, we have built on that domestication in the 13,000 years ago, made it much, much more efficient and much more technological. So I recently visited a dairy farm. This is a modern dairy farm in the Netherlands. The cows are doing their own business. There are no people there. They're going to milk robots about three times a day, or at least they get milked 3 times a day. The farmer who runs this spends 2 days a week on this farm. His wife converted one of the barns into a conference center, and his mother, who is 80 years old, has an app to keep track of all the animals. And if there is something wrong with one of the animals, there's a beep on the app, and it calls the vet, right, to take care of that. That's a modern milking farm at the moment. It's no longer, the ancient picture of people in the pasture trying to milk cows by hand. And a similar thing is happening in just crop production. It's highly mechanized, highly industrialized, if you like. And you see here, this is kind of an image for the future with a huge combine. And there's still a person there, but I have no idea why it needs to be there. It probably doesn't, right? New technologies are very often, for the first time, actually being tested in agriculture because it can do supposedly a little harm there. So all these technologies are actually focused on reducing labor and de-risking the traditional farm environment. Very useful to do that. Now, there are all sorts of other technologies in agriculture, like precision farming with satellite information on the moisture of the fields, the manure content, the quality of the crops. You have heard about DNA changes, CRISPR-Cas into kind of in a very detailed way, basically amplifying that domestication process that we started 13,000 years ago, but what you can now do in 3 years, right? And up to using all sorts of spaces in cities where you can locally produce your crops. So there's lots of technologies, and this is aimed at increasing productivity and using more land, basically, or more space to create enough crops for those 10 billion people who have to eat in 2050.